A lot of great players excelled at multiple sports. Perhaps the most famous multi-sport player of all is the great Bo Jackson. But while there are good examples of professional players switching between baseball and football, as well as baseball and basketball, it seems particularly difficult for football players to shoot hoops. Only 3 players in history have played both sports professionally. The chosen trios are Otto Graham and Bud Grant and Mark Vital. Otto Graham was probably the best football player of his generation. Indeed, The Athletic ranked him as the 11th best ever. He still holds NFL records for yards gained per pass attempt and has the highest career-winning percentage ever. But before that, Otto played a season for the Rochester Royals of the NBL, which was one of the 2 leagues that became the NBA. How good was he? Graham led them to the title. Indeed, he had excelled at basketball as a kid and attended Northwestern University on a basketball scholarship after making first-team basketball All-American in his senior year of high school. So there is no doubt that Otto could have continued to play basketball professionally. He was just better at football. Bud Grant was slightly younger than Otto and also made that switch. The guy was a natural athlete and lettered in football, basketball, and baseball for the University of Minnesota. After graduation, he was drafted by the Minneapolis Lakers in 1950, where he helped them to an NBA title in his first season. However, after 2 seasons, Bud found himself on the bench and retired from hoops. The following year, he signed for the Eagles. Grant went on to have an impressive career as a football player and coach. But that was a different era. Neither sport was as professional at the time, and the physical demands of specialization were lower. But even then, playing both professionally was exceptional, and no one else would do so for over half a century. Perhaps the best example is the difficulty faced by Mark Vital in playing both sports. Vital is built like a football player, standing at 6'5" and weighing 250 pounds. But because he is solid and quick, he usually played as a tight end on the gridiron. The Louisiana-born player never lacked an athletic talent. In 2012, Yahoo Sports called him middle school basketball's most impressive dunker, but he resented being labeled a mere dunker. Vital said, "I can dribble, I can score, I can play defense. I can do all of that. I don't know where people get that from. I'm just a leaper or a dunker though. I can do it all. I know I need to work on my shooting. I know I got a left hand. I know I got a right hand, but I just take that criticism and use it as motivation." Mark was also a star football player at the time, but soon put that aside to focus on hoops. He went to Baylor and in many ways had a very successful tenure at the Texas school. Vital redshirted in his first year and helped Baylor to the national title in 2021, averaging 12.6 points and 6.7 rebounds. But when Mark entered the 2021 draft, he was disappointed. Nevertheless, despite not being drafted, the player was signed by the Portland Trail Blazers, so observers were not too surprised when the Blazers cut the guard. However, his next move was absolutely shocking. Vital announced a switch to football. Vital soon signed with the Seahawks as a tight end. Despite not running a single play of organized football since he was prepubescent, Mark impressed the Seattle coaching staff. Some even compared him to the legendary Antonio Gates. Another player who transitioned from basketball back in the day earned 8 Pro Bowl appearances. Vital had never lacked confidence and said, "I'm already getting compared to a Hall of Famer, and that's motivation to get me to that level. I can see the similarities. He and I are both explosive, fast, and big. We are built the same." But that turned out to be some pretty severe wishful thinking. The Seahawks released Mark a few days later. The wannabe tight end was soon picked up by the Kansas City Chiefs, but was released a few months later, showing once again that football and basketball skills are incompatible. Vital could not make it either. It is almost impossible to play both basketball and football professionally. The skill sets are very different, and a lot of what makes you great in one sport can be detrimental in the other. However, it is far easier to transition to college. In particular, Some great football players were darn good collegiate hoopsters. Antonio Gates is probably the most famous example. The superstar tight end scored 20 points per game as a Kent State senior. He loved basketball so much that when University of Michigan coach Nick Saban insisted that he only play football, Gates transferred to East Michigan University and later to Kent State. But NBA scouts determined Antonio's size was detrimental to his game, so they referred to him as a tweener. This means someone who plays two positions but isn't the right size for either. But Gates was the perfect size for football. Drew Brees, his quarterback for the Chargers, remembers. It's amazing because he said at one point it kind of clicked for him, that he was just going to play tight end like he played basketball. Just posting up and using the same type of moves he would use to get open on the court is how he would get open as a tight end. The case of Jimmy Graham. The five-time Pro Bowl selected tight end had a similar story. He played 4 years of basketball for Miami University. But in his senior year, Jimmy also suited up for the football team. So why did he make the switch? Despite being a highly touted four-star prospect out of high school, Jimmy didn't live up to the expectations and never scored more than 6 points per game. In the end, Graham didn't quite have the skills for top-level basketball. But his main advantage was the imposing physique of the 6'7" and 259-pound forward. His future Saints teammate Ben Watson said, "As a huge fan of college sports, I originally knew of Jimmy Graham as an NBA hopeful. He played 4 seasons for the University of Miami as a power forward. As a hoops player, Graham's talent was minuscule. He was extremely physical and would display that at all costs. He was known to leave the game with more fouls than points. He reminded me of the college version of Dennis Rodman, minus the skill." Ouch! Tell us how you really feel, Ben. Ultimately, the bulk that kept Jimmy from being an ideal basketball player served him well as a tight end. The combination of raw size with agility and speed made him one of the best players in the NFL, at least for a season or two. And once again, the kind of deft skill you need to play basketball is simply lacking in football players. Basketball requires a certain amount of strength and toughness, but ultimately, it is a deft game of skill. Meanwhile, football requires no small amount of technique and coordination, but it has evolved into a test of strength and toughness. As a result, the training needed to bolster dexterity may come at the expense of brute force and vice versa. Players could play professionally in both before the training regimens encouraging these differences had reached their modern level of sophistication. Indeed, if you play either casually, there are skills in common. For example, the deft touch basketball players have, and their speedy acceleration can be very useful in football, especially for those playing as receivers or tight ends. So you could be naturally talented in both sports, but training will force you to pick one. And once you do, it's hard to change your mind. LeBron James had to decide. He played as a wide receiver in high school and made first-team All-State. With this raw strength and speed, it's easy to see how King James would have made a top-notch receiver. But James quit the sport because, as he remembers, "I took too many hits." He would have had to toughen up at the expense of the skill and talent that would make him the king of basketball.